No use complaining, we don't do geek shaming. We're here to talk gaming. Hello and welcome to D Infinity Live, your weekly multi-platform, multi-publisher online gaming webcast. I'm your host, William T. Thrasher. With me, as always, Michael Jolly Varhola, Brendan Cass, and returning to the show, our good friend Clint Staples. How you doing, Clint?
Doing very well, Will. Thank you.
Excellent. And tonight on the show, our topic is Lost Worlds, and we're going to get into the meat of that. But before we go on right now with our website, d-infinity.net.
Well, September has been a really good month for us. Now that we've wrapped it up, it's probably been one of our best-looking months yet. But I have to pick some highlights. So let's see. Mike wrote a very, very interesting and in-depth article on the origins of the Atlantis myth, and also speculates on where it might actually, in the real world, have been. So this is all based on all of Mike's travel and research over the years, and I think it's very insightful. Clint reworked a fun superhero power about keen senses for the
Bash superhero system?
Yeah, the Bash system, which is very fun. And then you, Will, of course, wrote a series of adventure hooks, Cthulhu Live adventure hooks, though they would, of course, work for Call of Cthulhu and other Cthulhu-esque role-playing games, for the World War I era, which, of course, ties in with our World War I centennial theme that we've had going for a while.
Yeah, that was a really fun one to put together.
Yeah, it's a good piece.
Can I also interject that Friends of Skirmisher Pagan Publishing just finished a Kickstarter for Horrors of War, which is a set of scenarios that they've done for Call of Cthulhu set in and around the Great War. So I'm sure that although the Kickstarter is finished, if you are interested in getting involved in that, they will still take your money. So.
Excellent.
A fair bet.
All right, and Mike, what is going on with our co-publisher Skirmisher?
Well, speaking of the Great War, we released just on Tuesday the first publication that we'll be releasing as part of our centennial Great War commemoration. We're going to be releasing one publication a month over the 4-year centennial commemoration of World War I, which is to say about 50 publications tying in with World War I over the next 4 years. And the first one is a reprint of a French publication called La Baïonnette. It meant, of course, the bayonet, and it was a publication that was designed to poke, as with the bayonet, fun at the Germans and raise the morale of the French. So it is a World War I publication. It's a 16-page magazine. We've republished it in its entirety. But beyond that, because there's only going to be limited interest in a 16-page World War I French magazine, we've made all of the images from it available as high-resolution clip art. So any publishers, like Pagan Publishing or anyone else that has publishing projects, can use this art as is in their publishing projects. So it's a clip art collection. It's a commemorative magazine. It's available at DriveThruRPG, RPG Now, and Wargame Vault. And then also our latest issue of the Wisdom from the Wastelands, post-apocalyptic game magazine, issue number 43, Optional Combat Rules. That came out last week. And then on Tuesday we'll be releasing Wisdom from the Wastelands, issue number 44, Unique Super Science Artifacts 3. So lots of good stuff. Check out the Skirmisher Publishing section on DriveThruRPG and the other One Bookshelf sites.
Yeah, and volume number 44 of Wisdom of the Wastelands is actually going to be pretty cool. We're going to be debuting the new look of Wisdom from the Wastelands.
That's right. Yeah, you will actually design a snazzy new logo for Wisdom from the Wastelands. It looks really good, and that's going to be part of the new look for this next issue. That's exactly right.
Yes. All right, well, ladies and gentlemen, it is now time to dig into our main topic, which is Lost Worlds in tabletop gaming. This is a topic I have been wanting to get to for quite some time, because when I think of adventurers having adventures, the first thing that comes to my mind is Indiana Jones going through the catacombs in a lost city trying to dig up old artifacts and old lore. There is a lot of potential for fun and adventure that happens in that environment. But before we go to our questions and comments from our viewers, gentlemen, let's just go around the room and give me your basic impression on Lost Worlds. Clint, since you are a guest, we'll have you go first.
Well, I think that Lost Worlds is much better than Lost Continent, which is the way we originally posted this, because it really broadens the scope of things, even up to and including things like Hyboria, which is sort of an antediluvian age that is essentially lost to the modern day, as Howard wrote it, of course. One of my personal favorites is Lemuria, another Howard property, King Kull of Lemuria and stuff like that. But also the Madame Blavatsky version, which, I mean, how the hell can you not have written a game source book about a continent, a secret hidden continent that from ages ago that was populated by telepathic giants riding dinosaurs? I mean, someone should have done that. Maybe we should have done that.
Well, we will be done with the core of the Swords of Coast series, so that could be a future project.
Right.
Blavatsky World. So anyway, I mean, obviously there's things like Pellucidar, the Hollow Earth, and that kind of stuff, which I grew up reading Burroughs and that kind of stuff, so I really have a huge fondness for that as well. And I'm a big fan of superhero comics and games. So in my own gaming, I ran a short-lived campaign set in 1951, and the Nazis had a base in Antarctica, and the heroes had to go and fight Nazis in powered armor in Antarctica. So,
well, Hitler was still living down there as of 1951, so that's a perfect plan.
So there you go. That's where I'm at.
How about you, Brendan?
Well, so I'm concept primarily because of the one question that it begs. It's lost, which begs the question, why? Why did it get lost in the first place? Because something had to have happened. If it were really that successful, it would still be around and probably not lost, right? So the opportunities for answering that question are always really fun in any role-playing game. Conquest, sometimes things like that happen. The Mongolians, for example, are really good at creating lost worlds. I know at one point they were pissed off at a city-state, dived and flooded it, and it disappeared. Their objective was to literally wipe it off the face of the map and history. It became a lost world at that point. So that's just an example of answering that. But that's really clever and fun. And I think any player that stumbles across that cause for things being lost is going to feel excited and accomplished for discovering it.
Yep.
And how about you, Mike?
I think the concept of Lost Worlds is awesome for role-playing games and for fiction and for movies and anything related to it for all sorts of reasons. One, because all the rules of reality go out the window when you get to the Lost World. I mean, if you don't have dinosaurs running around in your main campaign setting, then they're perfect to be running around in the Lost World. If minotaurs are not standard characters or are just mythological beings in the normal world, then having them as stock characters in the Lost World is fair game. The Lost World gives you a chance to turn the rules of reality around. So the whole implication is that it's a discrete area. It's a controllable area. It's an area where things are turned around, but where it's also very manageable for purposes of the story and the DM, which is also a desirable thing. So this is just a great concept. for role-playing games, and the fact that it is a universal concept, and we can talk about this more going into the show, but the idea of Lost Worlds is universal throughout the world. Every major culture has got a lost world, and we can postulate the reasons why moving on. But every major culture has got a lost world that's part of its history. The Australians, the Hawaiians, the Greeks, everybody's got one. So this is something that resonates.
Don't we have that lost pilgrims?
The lost colony of Roanoke.
Oh, that's right, the Roanoke colony. Exactly.
Yep.
That's more on a microscopic level, but you're right. I mean, what's funny, Brendan, is that if we go back to Plato in the 5th century BC, we get the legend of Atlantis, which has grown over the last 2,500 years. But you're right. You go back to a country that's just a couple hundred years old, and it's got its own lost world mythology. But also the lost cities of the cities of gold that the Spanish were searching for throughout the American Southwest. I mean, the idea of the lost continent, the lost city, the lost world, the lost land, this is just a universal concept. So it resonates with people in general and with people who are interested in stories of quest in particular.
All right, and going into our questions and comments from the audience, our first question comes from good friend of the show, Heath, who wants to know, and this is an interesting one, which lost civilization or continent would you rather see stay lost and why? I'm gonna go with...
Oh, well, that's a little cynical. I won't go first on that one. I got to think about that one for a second.
We're going to say Australia, Mike. You know you were going to say Australia.
I was not. That's dreadful. I would not make a real-world cultural reference in response to that. I'll think about that one a sec.
Well, I guess my own response, I would say Atlantis. If Atlantis was ever a real place, I honestly think it is better if it is lost. I feel like Atlantis has a greater value to us as a culture if it's something we're always looking for, something we're always striving for, something that we can look at as an ideal. I feel like if we ever actually did find a sunken land and it had buildings on it and it matched the Plato's description, a little bit of magic would kind of be drained out of the world with that discovery. Although that being said, I would love to see what archaeological finds they would dig up if such a place was ever discovered.
I'm on the fence on that one.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, because I mean, the quest for Atlantis is gone, but then again, they freaking found Atlantis. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Me personally, I want Ryla to stay gone. I don't think we need to find that one. If it stays submerged and lost, and every once in a while you get some shipwrecked guy jumping out of a window once every 10 years or so because he saw things.
And you're talking. Okay. I mean, just for anyone who might not know, you're talking about H.P. Lovecraft's Relia, which is the home to Lord Cthulhu, who lies dreaming but not dead at the bottom of the sea in a sepulcher in that city.
And Dagon's there as well, and all that other fun stuff.
Yeah, and fun fact, the sailor who jumps out of a window is writing about falling out of that window on the way down.
As he falls, yeah. And so I jump. It's Monty Python-esque.
It seems like a writer special ability more than a sailor special ability. It really does. Suicidal footnote.
A new feat for your OGL game.
There we go.
The last feat your character will ever need.
How about you, Clint?
Well, I was just thinking, and I don't know if there's any that I really want to stay lost. But I think I'd have to go along with you, Will, as far as Atlantis being far greater fodder for the imagination in its current state as a myth than it might be if evidence of it were found. I mean, there's lots of speculation that the Isle of Santorini and the volcano at Thera, the eruption at Thera, and stuff like that was the center of the myth of Atlantis that came down to Plato 1,000 years later. But that's still so heavily mythologized that that we can still use that in our imaginations. If
the Theran civilization is the basis for our lost culture in Swords of Coast.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. So.
But if we were
So-
to find, the direct evidence of Atlantis, then suddenly it becomes the province of archaeologists and historians, or at least classicists. And having done time as a classicist, you don't want that as a gamer, I don't think. So.
Well, Mike pointed this out to me, and Mike, you can expand on it. I'm sure you will. Archaeologists, they just don't care about myth.
No, that's right.
No, it's really amazing. I talked to a number of archaeologists, and I read innumerable little archaeological descriptive placards in antiquity museums when I was overseas in the Aegean in August. And what really struck me is there was no attempt to explain or classify mythological phenomena. So when it comes to strange creatures, for example, creatures that I would call chimerical beasts, archaeologists are dismissing them, and this amazes me because I guess gamers give a shit about this, but archaeologists don't. Archaeologists dismiss them all as griffins. So if you describe any kind of a monster whatsoever, if it has any kind of non-natural combination of parts, archaeologists these days dismisses it as a griffin. They just don't care. So yeah, to the extent that archaeologists examine the stuff, I think they wouldn't identify something as Atlantis if it had the word Atlantis inscribed on it in linear B. They just wouldn't do it because that goes so far beyond what they want to be doing in their own, actually rather narrow world. They're not interested in finding Atlantis. They're interested in finding something and then classifying it in their own way.
It's true.
You often do find these interesting overlaps between legend and folklore and kind of an ever-growing historical record. I mean, there was a period where it was believed that Troy was a fictional nation.
Yeah.
Because it only existed in writing, and then
Right.
the actual walls of the city Troy were discovered in Greece.
If I have to give an answer as to which one I'd want to see buried, I'd echo Clint a little bit and say I don't know that I want to see any of them buried. I think that's fair enough. And I definitely say that Atlantis is not one of the ones I want to see buried. I want to see Atlantis not treated in such a superficial, crappy way. Most people who talk about Atlantis have never even bothered to go to Project Gutenberg and download Plato's dialogues so they could read what Plato said about Atlantis 25 years ago. They're that fucking lazy. That's what we got to keep in mind. We're dealing with a lot of lazy people. So I don't want to see Atlantis buried. I want to see Atlantis elevated. I want to see it being given the treatment it deserves. If I'd like to see anything buried, I'd say it's any lost world that's been sort of moved into the mainstream so that the posers can identify it with it. So I guess I don't know if Asgard counts as a lost world, if the city of Valhalla counts as a lost world. But I like the Thor movies. They didn't do any favors for Valhalla and Asgard. They're just the gods are really just super powerful aliens. All right, so they've demystified it. Relia, I agree with Brendan to the extent that all the posers who are into the mythos but will not read the books if their life depended on it. They won't read Lovecraft. They won't read Clark Ashton Smith. They won't read Robert E. Howard. Yeah, better to just bury the lost worlds that these people have gravitated to in their sort of homogenized, lightweight form. So I'd say any of the lost worlds that have been made mainstream and kind of lightweight and meaningless, they're the ones I'd like to see disappear for a while. Sink back beneath the waves for a little bit.
So that they can gain their mystique again.
I think that's what it boils down to. Yeah. The Lost Worlds, I don't want them to disappear. I want them to maintain their mystique. Exactly so.
All right, next question comes from David Paul Lehman, who wants to know, have you ever run a campaign set in Atlantis, Lemuria, or Mu? And how did you make Lemuria and Mu different from Atlantis and each other? I've done a few games that involved those kinds of iconic lost civilizations, and the only one that jumps out, actually, I did a Hollow Earth Expedition campaign, which was partly inspired by the Doug McClure movie At the Earth's Core, which was in itself based on an Edgar Rice Burroughs novel. The adventurers had hijacked a Nazi burrowing machine and had ended up in the Hollow Earth, and a big part of that game, actually, that campaign, was that Atlantis was a real place, Lemuria was a real place, and Mu was a real place, but they weren't cities. They were each city-sized machines that some ancient race of something or others used to terraform the Earth. And so Atlantis actually had, it was a terraforming machine that could generate life. It could replicate organic material. It could evolve or devolve organisms. It kind of populated the planet. And then I believe.
Where is this from?
Pardon?
He made it up.
Yeah, I mean, this was the Hollow Earth Expedition RPG, but all the score I made up for the campaign.
Why aren't I publishing this? Damn it!
Yeah,
because you haven't asked about it until now.
Cool crap. We always come up with this cool crap, and then nobody can buy it because you just talk about it. Write it down.
All right, well, then I won't divulge the secret of what Lemuria and Mu did. We'll leave that to people's imaginations, and you can look for my Inner Earth adventure book, and we'll figure this out. So I'll yield my time. So who would like to continue on this thread?
What was the question?
The question from David was, have you ever run a campaign on Atlantis, Lemuria, or Mu?
Well, the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting does tie in with Atlantis. There are Atlanteans, and Atlantean is a language, and it is the most civilized bastion of Titanic worship that's left. So part of the backstory of the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting is the Titanomachia, this great battle between the gods and the Titans, who in 1,000-foot tall material form battled across the Aegean Sea and the Mediterranean. So we do have Atlantis. It is a bastion of Titan worshippers. And even though Thera and Santorini are actually physical locations that are important in the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting, that's not where Atlantis is located for us. I go with the description that Plato gave. Plato says Atlantis is located 1,000 miles west of the Pillars of Hercules. And good grief, if you look on a map, 1,000 miles west of the Pillars of Hercules are the Azores Islands, a set of 3 interconnected archipelagos. So this seems to me, if not in reality, then certainly in the context of a game, to be a very, 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 very compelling location for Atlantis. Plato talks about how once the disaster occurred in Atlantis, navigation throughout the Atlantic Ocean, which was once easy, became very, very difficult because of so much sediment and shoals and things like that were created. There is no mystery in Plato. Plato says Atlantis is located 1,000 miles from where the Mediterranean meets the Atlantic, and that is the Azores Islands. My guess is that some Greek expedition had made it to the Azores. Plato knew about that, and he drew upon that knowledge. Whether his Atlantis myth is factual or not, I think it's just a metaphor, to be honest with you. But he's talking about the Azores Islands. That's pretty clearly. He describes in very precise, unequivocal terms the location of the Azores. And that is where we have thus set the lost land of Atlantis in the Swords of Coast fantasy campaign setting, way beyond what most characters will ever accidentally get to.
Brendan?
Well, so I mean, I end up using the Therans as my lost people the most, particularly because I end up playtesting the Swords of Coast campaign setting quite often. Also, because the way we have it structured, they've got all this advanced technology, right? That's been lost to the world. So that I guess is not exactly a twist, but despite all of their advanced technology, when the Cataclysm hit, the Titanomachia started, they were still wiped out despite all that technology.
That's right.
And that's how I use them. So I end up sprinkling them all throughout the world. So that my implication then is that advanced lost culture was so successful and so pervasive that you can find bits and pieces of it all over the place, kind of like you can find Roman baths all the way up in England, for example, or you can find folks all the way out in Nepal that use the kukri because of Alexander and so on. So that sort of idea. So my Atlantis is sprinkled out throughout the world, and typically my players don't run into a single place that is Atlantis.
And Brendan makes a good point that we have evidence in the real world in our own lives, and keep in mind, for some of it, this isn't academic. I've sailed past the Azores while giving lectures on Atlantis. I've gone to Santorini and to these other places where these things have supposed to have taken place. I've spoken with a friend of mine who's a Hawaiian kahuna and has told me about the legend of Lemuria and how it was devised by the Hawaiian people to explain the indigenous people who lived in Hawaii when the people we call Hawaiians landed there 1,000 years ago. So for some of us, this goes beyond just an academic pursuit and has involved a bit of life's work and field work as well. And those lost worlds are in fact real places. They're real places that we can catch glimpses of in the course of our other activities. It puts a shiver up the back of my neck, even when I talk about this. But Brendan is absolutely right that these lost worlds represent things that existed at one time that we can sort of see a reflection of if we look hard enough and look in just the right way.
And how about you, Clint?
I've never actually run a game set in any of those places, but for me, Atlanteans and Lemurians primarily exist as one of the ultimate mysteries in a lot of the different games that I've run. Much like Brendan mentioned, sort of sprinkled through the world rather than a specific lost place for the players to find. In one game that I ran, all of the ley lines or what have you, wherever they intersected, the Atlanteans had placed portals that could be used to travel to other intersections of the ley lines. And so if you figured out how that worked, you could use those portals to travel across time and space and that kind of stuff. In another one that I had, a superhero game set in Victorian London, the Atlanteans were a sort of secret society that existed, having moved from their fallen island nation. They became very interested in the future of Britain from the time of the Caesars leaving Britain, and became the sort of ruling oligarchy of Britain and survived through the various invasions and stuff like that, so that they were sort of a secret ruling council in Victorian England and the Empire and that kind of stuff. So they're there for the players to bounce off of or run into in conflict, or even possibly occasionally as player characters, generally as lost members of a lost race, so that they get to find out about it in play rather than start with high tech and psychic powers and stuff like that. But they can find those things out about themselves as the game progresses. So.
Oh, I got another question.
That's a nice device.
Oh, what was that, Mike?
I said what Clint is describing is a nice device.
Thanks.
All right, we've got another question from David Paul Lehman, who wants to know, how do you get your players to distinguish between a lost world and one that was merely discovered? I guess a lot of it has to do with context. If the world, the continent, the region, the city, the civilization, what have you, has its own sort of unbroken continuity, then it's not really a place that's lost. It's just a place that you might discover. For me, for it to be a lost world, there kind of has to be a cataclysm or a break that cuts it off from the
Right.
mainstream civilization. Whether the land gets blighted by a god, gets cursed and sent into a demiplane, or in the case of a lot of science fiction, if the trade routes, people stopped applying the trade routes, and after a while, the data to where the planet's hyperspatial coordinates were lost. So if there's a break in that continuity, I would consider that a lost world, and I would try to impress that upon my players.
Yeah, yeah, I would agree, Will. I would say that a discovered world is one that people didn't know was there to start with. But a lost world is one that had some prominence and lost that prominence. And people knew it was there to be refound. So I'd say it would be the difference between discovered and lost.
Right.
Although that flies in the face of a lot of Lost World fiction that you see. Pellucidar, for example, was never commonly known in the world of Burroughs, right?
Well, you make a good point, and I guess it bears mentioning, Clint. I mean, you're right. I guess it bears mentioning that when we use the term "lost world," it's not a technical term.
Right.
It's a literary term. It's an evocative term. So, I mean, I guess if I had to give an answer, I give the one that I gave. But you're absolutely right. That what gets termed as lost world literature often has what I would discover. But you know what? Even in those lost worlds, I just for the sake of argument, I will note that in any of these lost worlds like Pellucidar, there is always some foothold that the ancients had in those
Sure.
worlds.
Yeah.
And so I would say that is what qualifies them as lost in that context. That's what I would say the difference is. They're lost because they were once known, as opposed to never being known and being discovered.
Well,
Yeah.
another thing
But
that
you can
makes
find exceptions. You're right.
well, another thing that makes them lost is that they're full of lost things. They're full of cave people, dinosaurs, old machines, and relics. Things that used to be common and are now just only found in this one place, whether people know it's there or not.
So I look at that loss, as much from the physical, literal sense of loss, as in I lost my keys, but also the metaphorical kind of spiritual sense of the term loss. And in a lot of these cases, there was some kind of glory to the place that has been lost. They've lost their prominence. They've lost whatever it was that made them successful. That sort of thing. But there's a lot of loss there that makes it a lost world, in the same way a person can lose themselves, but isn't
Sure.
necessarily physically lost. In that you can find bits and pieces of it, maybe that hint at it. But those pieces aren't lost. You found the piece, but it's still a lost world.
And we're being sort of semantic here, but really, from a literary point of view, a lost world can even be one's own culture from just a generation before. Values or ideas or ways of doing things that were lost. I mean, it would be fair to say in the generation after the Civil War that the antebellum world was a lost world. Where there were other ways of doing things, where people had other skill sets or other belief systems. So you can even have a lost world in that sense, right in your own society.
All right, we've got another question from
Back.
Pierce Thomas. Oh, yes?
No, go on.
Oh, sorry, I thought I had a side comment. All right, so Pierce Tomas asks, in these lost worlds, what do you like to populate them with? Do you use a single race or a mixed group of races in these places while playing in a campaign? My lost worlds two things. If I'm running a classic Lost World, it will have dinosaurs and other prehistoric monsters. I love anachronistic creatures, going all the way back to those weird five-eyed swimmy things with like the mouths on the ends of tentacles from the dawn of life on this earth. I love having those things show up in my Lost Worlds. But beyond that, usually if the Lost World does tie into some sort of like distant or ancient like alien race, or like an offshot of humanity that's barely recognizable as human, usually what I'll do is, if it's populated by people, it'll be populated by normal humans or whatever like the dominant race is in the campaign, but peppered among them will be people descended from the masters of the old civilization, and there will be some traits that distinguish them, whether it's albinism or like an unusual color of eyes, or maybe like webbing on the hands and feet. Again, depending on the nature of whoever built that lost civilization, I will usually have people that carry the blood or the legacy of that civilization in their veins and in their genes, peppered amongst the usual populace. How about you, Clint?
Let me see. I think for me, a Lost World is kind of a microcosm. It tends not to be the primary location that I'm setting a game in,
Right.
or that kind of thing. So it can't take a long time to develop. So usually I'll have a number of races, usually a fair amount of conflict. Or at least the potential for conflict, and very often the player characters are the sort of catalyst for that conflict, whether they know it or not, or whether they try to be or not. And so that puts them right at the center of whatever is going on. But I tend to think of Lost Worlds as a scene in an ongoing campaign, or an arc in an ongoing campaign. But I haven't set a long-term campaign in a Lost World, if you know what I mean. So I don't consider myself to have the time to take things slow while I'm there, if you know what I mean.
And I like to base a lot of what I do in my games with the nearest modern-day analog that I can find. Just because I feel like that ends up making stuff feel more real, because it's actually an example that is currently living and breathing. It's not something that somebody made up. It's something that is organically making itself up just because that's the way it's run. And so when I think of Lost Peoples, and the nearest analog that I can think of for that, I either lean towards like the Pygmies, or the Amish, even in the United States. And there's one thing that both of those societies have in common, which lead them to having that sort of lost feeling, and that's their homogeneity. They're identical in the senses that matter in this particular case. They're all very, very, very similar. So when people run into Lost Peoples in my games, I tend to carry that over, just because all the examples that I've run into of living, breathing lost worlds and lost peoples are these homogeneous societies.
Oh, and actually, something I did want to touch on. This is somewhat connected to Lost Worlds, because whenever Mike, and I'm sure you have strong feelings about this, whenever you have stories, cheesy or otherwise, about Atlantis and a number of other lost civilizations, there's almost always comments about how like all these aspects of civilization are based on or influenced by Atlantis, or whatever collapsed civilization came before. And strangely enough, Brendan, this is what reminded me of it. There was kind of a precedent for this. The cargo cults, who were these native indigenous people during World War II, who they saw Allied planes flying overhead, they saw Allied air bases getting airlifted supplies, and so they just kind of assumed that the Allies had mastery.
I know exactly who you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and so they would actually develop their own rituals based on what they could see going on in the Allied air bases. So they would, instead of having normal altars, they would build things that looked similar to the flight control towers, and they would speak into horns the same way they would see flight controllers speaking into their radio headsets. In the idea that they were communicating with their gods, and it's a very short leap to make if you think that there could be some ridiculously advanced old civilization, how the survivors or even the people there at the time could look at it and misinterpret its technology and its philosophy and all of the things that make it advanced and try to ape it in some way to reap a benefit.
I hate to say it, no one wants to hear this, but if it makes someone stop, just pause for a second and rethink some things. This is the basis of most world religions, a fundamental misinterpretation of the divine. It's taking those things that God has shown people and just completely interpreting them in the absolute incorrect way. We see it with primitive societies. People don't always see it with their own. But I think what you said is very, very profound. That is the cargo cults are I think a metaphor that people should pay attention to in general. Elements for Lost Worlds that I always have, a forgotten race. I think we all echo that. I like the Lemurian Lost Race. I think I referred to it earlier. People who believe in the traditional lore of Hawaii, most of them being Hawaiians, actually believe that this race lives in the caves and mountains of Hawaii, and they're called the Menahunes. They're a race of small people, of little people, that live in the hidden valleys and caves and mountains of Hawaii, and they are the descendants of the ancestral Lemurians. So I think having that hidden race, that descendant race, I think that's a good element of a Lost World. And then either lost technology or lost magic. I think those are great elements. And really, the difference between lost technology and lost magic, really, really kind of academic. If it doesn't matter which it is, if you don't know how to use it or you don't know where it came from and you don't know how to replicate it, it could be technology or magic or anything else. The net effect is about the same. So those are the two elements that I really, really like to get into the whole Lost World concept.
Brendan?
Did I not answer this question?
We kind of got off on a tangent. I didn't know if you had anything you wanted to add.
I spoke about the Amish and the Pygmies and how the modern societies that are most lost to us are kind of my inspiration.
Yeah. And that's what led me into the Menahunes, actually. Yeah. Brendan's reference.
But for those interested,
the same ilk of people, at least for purposes of storytelling.
Yeah, they're Pacific Islanders near Japan and East Asia that Will was referring to with these cargo plane cults. You can Google them if you're interested in learning more about them.
And they're not all cannibals and headhunters.
No. I think there's even a Pacific Island that worships Prince William, one of them.
Right.
Yeah.
I tell you what, look it up and tell us about it on next week.
Yeah, there you go. If you figure out which prince it is that they worship, let us know.
Because right then and there, I'm already imagining, some D&D campaign. If we can trick enough goblins into worshiping us as gods, we will attain divinity, and can go to the celestial plane, and then kill things that'll get us real huge XP.
Yeah, it's horrible.
But Mike, though, you had talked about lost magic and lost technology. There's a thread in a lot of fantasy, which of course shows up in a lot of fantasy role-playing games, that the big lost world, the big lost civilization, lost continent, what have you, is the source of the first magic, a form of magic that is greater and more powerful than anything anyone uses in the setting, which is always a pale echo. And I had a question for all of you. Have you ever really used that concept of like the first magic from the Lost World in your game? Have your players ever gotten a hold of it?
Have my players ever gotten a hold of it?
Well, have you used it, and have they ever gotten a hold of it?
Yes. Have they gotten a hold of it? Yes. Have they known what it was, or have they used it effectively? No, not necessarily. So
I mean, I guess
don't know if
in
that's a
D&D,
thing on
these
my
are what we
part.
call artifacts.
Pardon?
In D&D, these are this phenomenon is normally what we call artifacts. They're things that are double-edged and very strange and sort of inexplicable. I mean, that's
Right.
sort of the D&D interpretation of this concept Will's talking about, I think.
That's part of it, yes. Brendan?
Typically, in situations like that, whenever I've employed that concept, it's been when people have figured out their own magic to the point where they've transcended just whatever existence they originally had. So they've left whatever the material plane is, and they've gone on and become something more than what they were before. That transcendence is definitely a theme in my purest forms of magic, and that's inspired by a lot of actually Eastern religion. The concept of finding enlightenment and all that stuff. So then the people who end up getting their hands on that, it doesn't actually end up doing anything for them in the sense that like a role-playing game player would care about, being able to kill more hold of something like that. They either let it go or they end up transcending what they are right now and effectively die for all intents and purposes.
Yeah, actually, I did do I did do a campaign where a thread throughout it is that they from the Lost World, the players discovered that there was this ancient language that the verbal components from all spells were originally based on. That the verbal components you would use in the campaign were horrible mispronunciation pidgin versions of this ancient language.
That's classic. That's good. Yeah.
Yeah, and they would find snippets of this language. And the thing is, though, because this language was effectively the source code of the universe, which the people of the Lost World had figured out.
Lost knowledge, lost technology. So yeah, that's dead on. You're exactly right, Will.
And it was dangerous because it was like giving it's like giving a 3-year-old a shotgun and not telling them what it is. So one of the first things that happened, they discovered a word and they figured out how to pronounce it. And before even figuring out what the word is, just decided to say it out loud. And that word was the primal word representing the concept of fire. So immediately the shockwave of fire blasted out from around the guy and just incinerated everything it touched. And anytime they said a word, it was always that big, that powerful, and that unpredictable. So most of the times they kept their mouths shut.
That's the idea.
Which is uncharacteristically from them. Well, gentlemen, I think we've had a really good discussion of the topic of Lost Worlds. But before we sign off for the night, I thought we'd do one last thing, and that's have us each recommend some sort of book, movie, some sort of source material tying into the idea of Lost Worlds. And I'll go ahead and get mine out of the way. I'm going to suggest the Hollow Earth Expedition RPG. It's a really fun pulp era RPG that in the book they pack in just about every Lost World concept: dinosaurs, Atlantis, ancient magic, Amazons, Nazis, lost Victorian explorers in the core of the Earth. It's just a good synthesis of all these ideas that we've been talking about tonight, and also has its own really good recommended reading and viewing list. And it's also very fun to play. Brandon?
Well, actually, I'm going to go for a video game here, just because I put a lot of hours into it. But Bethesda Soft, they did most recently Skyrim, which was super popular, and then before that Oblivion, and before that Morrowind. But they have, in every single one of their game, had some kind of dead race, and the ruins are everywhere. So it's not lost necessarily if you're talking about it being physically lost, but the race itself is lost. And so you get to go into these ruins, you explore all these things, and damn it, all you end up wanting to do at the end of the day is see one of them. so their dwarves are extinct, right? You don't see a single dwarf, and it's the most frustrating thing because you just want to see a dwarf, just one. You want to see what they looked like, and you just talk to one of the guys that built all those. And I think they did a very good job.
You're talking about Elder Scrolls Skyrim.
Yeah. That one, in Skyrim, it's dwarves. In Morrowind, it's dwarves. And in Oblivion, it's their high elves. But regardless, everything's really deadly and kills you, and you just want to talk to one and ask them why. Why did you do this?
Yep. You ever notice in those games you can find dwarven armor in dwarven ruins, and no matter what race you're playing, it always fits?
That's good armor.
Pretty good armor, but that's D&D armor. Your players, whatever it is, the fuck they pick up from one of the monsters, it doesn't matter. It fits. They put it on.
Depends on the edition too. I don't think that applied in second edition. I think second edition they really clamped down on that.
That's true. In second edition you couldn't wear anything. In 3.5 you can wear everything. So
that's right.
Well, that's why the Armorer Profession skill is very useful to have if you're running a grounded campaign.
Right.
All right, how about you, Mike?
If I had to recommend one story that really summed up, and it's a little counterintuitive, it might not occur to most people, but it really sums up everything we've talked about with regard to Lost Worlds, all the characteristics of Lost Worlds, a sort of lost race, and a microcosmic atmosphere, and beasts from a past eon. It's a Robert E. Howard story. Robert E. Howard, as most people should know, is the creator of Conan, and this is a Conan story, and the story is Red Nails. And Red Nails is a novella by Robert E. Howard, very possibly the greatest story he ever wrote. And it is set in a microcosm that is essentially a lost world. It's been lost for a century or so. A self-contained city that's completely cut off from the rest of the world, and the heroes Conan and Valeria stumble across it. And then they're the fly in the ointment. They're the catalyst that changes the stasis that is sort of set in this lost world, in this sealed city. So I would say Red Nails is the go-to story for really getting a sense for a microcosm, for a lost city that is rediscovered by adventurers, and the impact those adventurers then have on its fate.
All right, now Clint, as our special guest, we will give you the last word.
Well, it's not new by any stretch, but maybe for some younger viewers it might be. But for all of the things that we've been talking about tonight, I don't think you can go wrong with reading the Burroughs Pellucidar books. I really don't. They have just everything that we've been talking about, lost civilizations, Hollow Earth, ancient races, ancient evils, hidden or lost explorers, Victorian sensibilities, and all that kind of thing. It's obviously the stuff that Hollow Earth Expeditions is trading on and that sort of thing. But Burroughs has been around for a while, and maybe there are people out there that haven't taken advantage of that fact. But you can get just about everything you want for an entire series of Lost World campaigns by reading At the Earth's Core or any of the other Tarzan at the Earth's Core, that kind of stuff.
You're right. You can't go wrong with any of those.
Yeah. So.
Yep.
All right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was D Infinity Live Lost World. So for myself, William T. Thrasher, for Michael Jolly Varhola, for Brendan Cass, and for our special guest, Clint Staples, this has been D Infinity Live, and we will see you all next week.